Hey everybody, it's Dan Mori with Staffing Monthly, and welcome back to this month's issue. And I hope you are enjoying it so far. You are really in for a treat today. I have back on the show with us one of my favorite people, Kim Henderson with Cobalt Compass. And Kim is somebody that I've gotten to know over the last year or so and really got connected prior to the Staffing Sales Summit. She became highly recommended to present at that. I was a little unfamiliar with her work and what she's done since she's moved out of the staffing industry and really into consulting and working with executives, helping them get their businesses straight and scaling. Um, and what I saw her do at the Staffing Sales Summit was tremendous. And she actually talked to the audience about one of the fastest growing subsets of the staffing industry called statement of work or SOW business. And this is really an untapped kind of an untapped field, and it's an area for some companies to be able to circumvent complex locked in contractual relationships and still get some business out of it and maybe even more favorable terms. And she sat in the front of the room masterfully teaching executives and sales leaders of some of the strongest sales staffing companies in the country about how to do this. And in the follow-up, I heard people say that they would hate to sell against Kim Henderson. She is an assassin, that she's absolutely skilled and the best of the best. And then even in the long-term follow-up, when I checked in with companies to see how they were doing with their content, they were actually putting it to work. They were actually applying their SOW business and practices that Kim taught them, and it was having a profound positive impact on their business, which is all the more reason that you should pay attention to what we're going to be talking about today. Now, the reason that we invited Kim back today was because there's something going on in the staffing industry with MSPs, and more specifically with the VMS software kind of starting to infiltrate the middle market of staffing at an alarming rate. It's cannibalized 85% of the enterprise space. Now they're looking to expand into the middle market. And if you currently work with MSPs as your clients or you're part of an MSP, you probably have thought that you're just sort of pigeonholed into certain contracts, certain clients, certain rates, and not all of that is true. And Kim, who is this kind of behind the scenes master and knows how all the levers work, is going to share with you a very powerful strategy on how she sells to MSPs to expand the business. And this is going to be so huge over the next really 1 to 5 years. This is going to be the game with the way our industry is going. So if you're not familiar with Kim Henderson, Cobalt Compass, she is an executive coach. She's somebody that absolutely works with coaches out there. She works with senior leaders of staffing organizations, and she helps them grow their business. So, Kim, without further ado, I'm going to welcome you back to the platform. The stage is yours, my friend.
Okay, Dan, thank you so much for inviting me back in again. I appreciate that. And I love, I think I'm going to add into my repertoire, assassin. That's a great one. I like that. That's a great term. In a good way, right? Not in a
Absolutely.
bad way. But you make a great point. Throughout my career in staffing, I did quite a bit of national and global accounts. And just by the nature of those accounts, right? Many of them are driven, most of them are driven with an MSP and a VMS on site. So what the team and I had to do pretty quickly is learn how to navigate in an MSP environment, how to become a trusted advisor, how to work with them in order to get the revenue out of the account, right? So with that, along the way, throughout years and years, learned a lot of things. Made some mistakes, learned what works, learned what doesn't work, and hopefully I can pass some of that on to our listeners today. But I think, Dan, the interesting thing is, believe it or not, when MSPs first came on the scene, it was like 1999, 2000. Companies like Chimes and Procure Staff, just taking us way back into antiquity, they came on the scene and we somewhat scratched our head in staffing and said, gosh, I hope this goes away. Don't let this last. But to your point that you mentioned earlier, it's proliferated the staffing industry, and any company with sizable spend is going to have an MSP in place to handle requisition flow and contain costs. And with that, as you noted, it's not only large customers, it's medium sized, but it's multiple industries as well. I've noticed over the past few years it expanding into the healthcare segment. It's expanded into DoD and government. So it's not just in your traditional companies like telecom and financial services. So with that, maybe let's try to go and uncover first, maybe define it, right? For some of the folks out here that may be a little, not quite sure of MSP and VMS and how they interact.
Yeah.
And then let's jump into together best ways to sell to them, right? There's no silver bullet, but there's a way that I've found that has helped me and helped members of my team. So we'll kind of uncover that and go through it. So first, the MSP, the definition, right? They're a managed service provider, and it's when a it's when a client goes and outsources their entire contingent labor program to a third party. And some of the MSPs that are out there that are popular today, I'll call them the powerhouses. I don't know if you've heard of them, Dan. I'm sure you have. There's Tapfin, there's Pontoon, there's Allegis, there's Agile One. And companies like Allegis, right? They're offshoots of tech systems.
Yeah.
Randstad has theirs as well. I know Hayes, where I came from, they their own, MSP. And, with that, oftentimes a VMS comes with it. And a VMS is actually the tool, the web tool. What people often ask me, I guess the first myth to dispel here is you don't have to have an MSP in place to have a VMS.
Correct.
Some companies actually opt just for the VMS. I did a lot of work in the past with HP Federal, and they didn't have an MSP. They just bought the tool, right?
Yeah.
And some of those tools are like Fieldglass and Beeline and
Simple VMS. I mean, that's the big play right now with staffing agencies that are taking the tool to market, as their own kind of solution to provide that benefit to clients. Yeah.
You're right. Yeah, actually, some companies have bottled that tool up and said, "Hey, we're going to go to your point, Dan, go out there and package it up and sell it."
Yeah.
Independent of the MSP, right? Just based on whatever the customer need is. So that's, I think, the first myth to dispel that, you can't have a VMS without having, an MSP. So let's start with the fun part, right? What are the benefits to us with an MSP in place? You're going, oh my gosh, benefits, please. We all want to run, screaming for the hills. There can't be any benefits, but there are. Look at it this way, Dan. How hard is it sometimes for us to take LinkedIn, Zoom info, look at our CRM, and hunt for prospects, right? And actually find the business once we get an MSA in place. Well, one of the beauties of the MSP and the VMS is manager names oftentimes can appear on job requisitions. Kind of a cheat sheet, right? We're able to go, okay, John Doe handles this rec. Let me reach out, get him on the phone, go schedule a meeting. So not always, but in some cases that is there. And that's a great way to short circuit and fast track our BD efforts. Further, job orders in general are coming to us via the web tool. We don't have to go and dig out each individual job order with each individual manager. So what that does, at least what it did for me, is it exposed a lot of volume opportunities. And it actually gave me focus into teams or divisions or business units that I didn't even know existed within my customers. And it gave me a keen eye as, whoa, okay, this division or this business unit's got a big project going. They're doing like an IT software upgrade. I never would have known that until I sat there and did the long-term legwork. So there's a lot of pieces right there that fast track our BD efforts. Also, I think too, it can help us from a back office standpoint. Would you agree, Dan, that as a staffing company, sometimes we get those things wrong, right? Like keeping our contracts and work orders up to date and timekeeping and invoicing. Do you think we mess that up from time to time?
It happens. It absolutely happens. I mean, people are only human. And as we grow and scale and there's new technology and new processes, sometimes they just break down, and it does happen that we can drop the ball at times.
Yeah. So what I found is it gave us, it kind of kept us honest, right? It gave us a smooth workflow with the VMS that kept us honest to keep contracts, work orders up to date, to be able to invoice properly, to be able to do timekeeping properly, because it walked us through the system. It left a lot less chance for human error there in the back office, as you kind of noted. So Dan, what do you think some of the benefits are? Those are benefits to us, right? It makes the sales process maybe a little bit easier instead of having to dig it all out. It's kind of right in front of you. We just have to take that information, capitalize on it, and get out in front of them. But what do you think are some of the benefits to the clients? Why do you think these companies put an MSP in place to begin with? What are your thoughts?
So my thought is it's typically a company that has a more comprehensive or complex contingent management program, and they've typically tried to rely on one vendor and it didn't work. One vendor couldn't support it all or didn't support it well, and maybe they replaced that vendor with another single vendor and it didn't work. So like, okay, we need to bring in a secondary and then maybe a third, and really it might have been predicated with the quality delivery of the actual providers of the staffing agencies, but ultimately they had to rely on multiple vendors, and then there's multiple relationships and there's multiple processes, there's multiple rate cards, and it's just a lot, and typically those enterprise level companies or mid-market companies, they want to run lean, and they want to do things efficiently. So they're like, hey, if we can have one point of contact, right? If we can just talk to the MSP point of contact and they can manage that whole program and that whole can of worms in an organized fashion and make it easier on us and streamline it, that would be great. And then the second level is when you're managing those relationships, a lot of times the staffing industry is not the most sophisticated and we don't do the best job of presenting our performance metrics and data, the very data that those companies need to make key decisions about their strategic plan, their growth, which product to move into, where to cut costs, like all of that kind of stuff. Those companies need that information, and they would have it if they were managing their own staffing program in-house. But because they outsource it, they lose visibility, and the MSPs tend to promise software that can actually monitor some of that, measured against KPIs, and then give them the data and information they need. And a lot of times the MSPs do position it as vendor paid, so it actually is a reasonable cost benefit to the I guess the staffing client or the employer. That's my perspective, Kim. How you think I'm out in left field on that?
No, you're right on track. There's also a perception that there's a reduced time to fill cycle, right? That the MSP will be able to fill roles much more quickly. And I'd say that that's perceived. That's often not true. There's also a perception that there's going to be enhanced access to talent, right? That you're going to have all this talent, the labor pool coming through the MSP system that maybe otherwise you wouldn't access. So I say that that's perceived. It could be real. It could be not. But I think the key is, to your point, you have all these suppliers in there. Ultimately, what can happen is there can be a lot of rogue spending. The MSP gives them visibility into spend, and it gives them stabilization, right, of bill rates. And then ultimately through that, control where they can go and get rates, at a level where they feel comfortable and confident that they can go and save money. So ultimately, there is that piece to it, to save money, visibility into rates, getting rates standardized, and ultimately, cutting spend for contingent labor. So that's kind of like the world that we lived in. But you mentioned as well, and I agree with this, the reporting and the tracking and the metrics that they're able to go and pull together, speak volumes to the company. If the company's able to see suppliers that are performing, they're able to see ones that aren't, they're able to see, how their spend is tracking for contingent labor. So there's definitely a lot of pros of why clients actually go and sign these individuals on, these individual MSPs on. There's also one that we didn't hit on, and that's compliance, regulatory compliance,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah.
So, yeah. So think about from a contractual standpoint. Let's say you've got a bunch of rogue suppliers in there. Maybe some of them haven't signed your agreement, which gives you legal exposure. Maybe some of them are, have had contractors out there billing for 5 years, and now there's a co-employment issue potentially. So it kind of gathers up all the regulatory and legal compliance measures that the company wants their suppliers to adhere to, and it ensures that happens because the MSP steps through that as their workflow. And again, minimizes risk, minimizes legalities to the company because the MSP has all that, corralled and under control in terms of the suppliers and their VMS. So that's a key piece too. They want to minimize the, legal ramifications if they can, right?
Yeah, and it's smart. Honestly, that's in the staffing company that I'm a part of, that was a really big deal. Like we partner with a third party compliance company to help us keep track of that on our side. Because again, once you start servicing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of clients that all
Right.
have different agreements and, SLAs and all of that stuff and insurance requirements, like you have to make sure that all that stuff is tight. And then you also, we have an obligation to make sure that we're staying compliant and not exposing our clients to regulatory issues, and, so shout out Compliance Solutions. But yeah, compliance is a huge deal. I can't even, glad you pointed that out. I can't even leave that escape my mental radar about why that's a benefit to the client.
Yeah, and I think we learned the hard way on that when a client audits us. Where in the world I came from, we had several client audits. And in the early days when we didn't necessarily have great processes in place, there were audits that we failed. And when you fail an audit, as you know, that the ramifications can be pretty high. It can either be,
Yeah.
penalties where you have to pay them money, ouch, or it
Yeah.
could be, you're removed from the list or suspended from a supplier list. So in a way, it's good for the company, but it also kind of helps keep us honest as well.
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
so with that, okay, how do we actually start to make inroads to the MSP? What do we do? How do we try to capitalize on this and sell to them? And the way I looked at it is I needed to do a few things concurrently at the same time. Okay. So the first thing I did was reach out to the program manager of a particular MSP that I was interested in getting into. So the supplier relationship manager, the program manager, and attempt to meet them. The first thing that I'm trying to do with that is understand the program. And I think this is a key part, Dan. So many times a company can go, excuse me, a staffing company can go and sign on with an MSP, not ask all the right questions and determine, wow, we've signed on a dud here and our process doesn't match, our geography doesn't match, we can't deliver in their process, we can't deliver to their rate structure, and the whole thing blows up, goes sideways. We get kicked off of the MSP list. The MSP says, staffing company XYZ, they did a terrible job for us at this client. We're not going to let them into these other clients that we're bringing on board here. So this part I can't speak enough to, right? Ask the questions. What is their process? What's their rate structure? What are the skill sets that they hire for? Can you meet those skill sets? What geographies do you have to service? Pretty darn important because usually MSPs are hiring on a national basis. If you have no
Yeah.
capability to deliver in Boise, Idaho, maybe you shouldn't sign up for it if that's one of their major hiring hubs, right? So you really need to understand all the components of the MSP. And I actually, with my team, we developed like an MSP scorecard where you could go and ask all these questions. And really at the end of the day, mark it off and say, it was pretty apparent, wow, we don't match in all these parameters. It's better for us to walk from this and respectfully thank them for their time because it's going to open up the door hopefully in the future for us. So that's point number one.
It's
Along
smart.
with that,
It's
yeah, and
smart.
Dan,
And yeah,
yeah,
and
so
to add on to that, that's a really good point that the audience needs to take away is like understanding, the metrics that the MSP is grading you on. Sometimes they're not always clear in that. And it can have a detriment if you say, yeah, I want to, a lot of staffing agencies will say, I want access to every opportunity because you think that maybe you can pick and choose in the back end. But I've seen agencies that say, yeah, we want those engineering roles that maybe they don't specialize in, but like they feel like they're capable of doing it. And they'll open that up, but then they see an order come across, like, we can't do it, so they don't submit anybody. Another
right,
order, can't do it, they don't submit anybody. What happens is all of those, you say that, yes, I can do this, and then all those non-submissions look like zeros on the scorecard, and then you drop off, and then you'll basically get the reprimand letter, maybe even the removal letter from the MSP, and you're like, wait a second, what do you mean? Like, I didn't send you bad talent, I didn't do this, but it's like, you have to know that. And that's a really important point that you mentioned there.
yeah, realize to your point, the scorecard, they live and die by that scorecard. And yeah, non-submissions you're going to get dinged for. You're going to get dinged for if you submit a lot of people just to kind of go and fill the pipeline. If they're not getting interviews and getting placements, they have all the metrics and ratios tracked. So we can't avoid the scorecard because that's something that they use as part of their dashboard. Another thing to consider is their contract. And at this point, we may not have their contract to peruse, but when we get down to it, pay very close attention to it, right? There's going to be things in there that you'll maybe have to live with or negotiate hard to get out of there, right? Like tenure discounts. You can take a discount on people once they've been out there a year. Volume discounts, that's heavy. Sometimes they want a prompt payment discount. There's a lot of auditing that can go on with an MSP. Are you set up to be able to track those items in your back office to make sure you don't fail an audit? So I'd say is their contracts tend to be more complex. They tend to be sometimes a bit more one-sided, right? So the onus is on us to be able to determine what items do I want to negotiate out of there, and if I can't, can I live in this structure? Am I ready, willing, and able to do it, successfully? So the contractual terms can definitely be something that are, the onus is on us, right, at that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, so with that, that's point one, right? We're going to the supplier relationship manager, making an introduction, then learn if we are actually right for the program, right? But we want to ask them, it's no different than a client. What are their pain points, right? What skill sets are they struggling to deliver? That could be an in for us. What geographies are they struggling to answer? I found that one, Dan, to be a great entry point into MSPs, because while they can find people in Dallas, Texas, maybe they can't in Kansas City, Kansas, right? So asking about geography. Also, too, what does their program encompass? Because there could be an entry point outside of it or inside of it. Is it just temporary labor, or does it also encompass direct hires, or is that outside? Does it also encompass SOW? Because sometimes we're starting to see SOW get roped in to MSPs. Yeah. Oftentimes it's not, sometimes it is. Does it encompass payroll? Payroll providers. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So we want to understand the big picture piece there to determine, it doesn't encompass direct hire. Maybe that's my entry point into this organization after all, at the end of the day. But then that start to ask the questions, right? What are they not getting from their suppliers? Is it the skill set? Is it the underperforming in a geography, like we mentioned? Do they have a lot of suppliers, Dan, that are rogue and not being compliant? Do they have suppliers that are not good at retention and onboarding? Onboarding, if you think about, Dan, is where staffing companies often fall down. There's a lot of paperwork to fill out, backgrounds. We don't do a great job of that. Would you agree? So
I do. And
yeah.
I just got to share, like, it's a bit of an epiphany, because I've sat with a lot of staffing consultants or sales consultants that have been on those MSP calls. And it's so funny when you said, hey, go through like your discovery and the pain points, just like you would if it was a regular client meeting. That honestly, if there's one gold nugget that the audience takes away, like that's a pretty good one, right? Because I feel like a lot of times the staffing sales consultants I've seen when they work with the MSPs, they feel like they're being interviewed, and the MSP is like, can you do this? Can you do this? And they're like, yes. And they're basically going through like a very rigid, sterile RFP process, but they're not really taking time to think about the fact that the MSP, they have deliverables that they have to deliver to the client, and there are pain points, and they're not asking those discovery questions. They're just basically getting interviewed, and hoping to get the slot. And I think that mindset shift was really powerful. I think that's a brilliant, I guess, piece of advice from your part, Kim, is to say, don't treat it like a sales call. Like treat them because they are the client. They are your client at this point, and you've got to deliver your candidates to them. They might be an intermediary, but at the end of the day, they're your client. They have pain points. They have things they're trying to solve for, and they're looking to you to help solve them. And if you can figure that out and be the solution, you're going to get picked and have a great partnership, just like you would as if it was a traditional client.
You're exactly right. Yeah, they have all kinds of issues that just like any client would. And Dan, your point is key. I always like to ask, hey, how are you as the MSP scorecarded with your client? What are some of the areas that you need to adhere to and excel at and deliver for your end client? Because that could be a great entry point to talk about, where they're struggling as the MSP, and maybe we can help in some of those areas. But what I found too is beyond struggling to get all the skill sets and all the geographies, there's always usually a retention and onboarding problem. Onboarding can be sloppy with a lot of staffing providers, as we mentioned, but retention too. Doesn't do anybody any good if the MSP and the staffing company get somebody hired and they bounce out, month two, because the staffing company is pretty poor at follow-up and post-sale support of contractors on assignment. So I found that's more of an issue than we might think. And so it always actually warrants asking that question. So, and never skipping it. So I think to that point, Dan, that's step one of the stool, right? Reaching out to that supplier of VP of supplier program, determining if we're right for them to begin with, and then two, finding their pain points. The second entry point that I take concurrent with all this is reaching out at the corporate MSP level to the VP of programs, because maybe I won't gain entry into that one program that I was speaking to the supplier manager about. But maybe if I'm talking to the VP of all the programs, maybe there's another program somewhere else where they do need our help, where we can have an entry point, where they are suffering, where they do have pain points that we can answer. So I found that going up, a couple levels to that VP of the MSP gives us greater exposure to other programs where we might be able to gain entry versus the other one instead of waiting, right? And also too, it's almost like when we meet our clients, we don't just want to work at the manager level. We always want to get up to that C-level, VP level. Same exact thing with the MSPs, because they have a different view, and it's going to be more strategic, and they may need a partner on different levels versus that individual program level. Agreed?
Yeah, yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Okay, so that's point two. The third leg of the stool that I would do concurrent with this is just like you normally would, get in front of the managers, the directors, the VPs, C-level if you can, at the end client. And the reason for this is just because the MSP thinks they're doing a great job and thinks they're delivering well, the hiring manager, that user buyer, they may have a completely different opinion, right? They may have pain points. So we want to penetrate those individuals just like we normally would, and start to ask the questions, right? To maybe expose flaws in the MSP's process or their results. So, things like the standard questions, how well does the MSP process work for you? How long does it take to typically get resources? What skill sets do they struggle to deliver to you? What geographies do they struggle in? What could they do better? What are some of the other challenges that you observe that they have? Do their people stay once they get on assignment? How quickly are the people onboarded? So again, taking that end customer, that end director, manager, down the path of self-discovery to say, yeah, while this MSP is here, they were supposed to solve all my hiring problems, and in effect, they haven't solved my hiring problems. And then what I hope happens here, or what I'm trying to get to happen here is, get some exposure into a point where we can help them, right? Can they let us work a trial job or a difficult job where they're not getting coverage by the MSP? Can we do a direct hire instead to get there? As we work that trial job, Dan, if they can't add us to the list, be creative. Can you stroke a purchase order for me, or give me a one-off work order if I happen to fill this role, right? Or if I happen to fill this role, can you sponsor me to the MSP leadership? Can you give me a referral to them? Can you give me a recommendation if I'm able to fill this role for you? So again, we're trying to get them to champion us to the MSP by solving a problem, right? And usually that problem is skill set or geography, or really could be a host of any of those things we talked about. I mean, have you tried that approach as well? Concurrent hiring manager along with the MSP?
So I have, but I want to dig into that one, because I feel like that is one of the biggest pain points of a staffing agency, is that an MSP steps in between those relationships, and the MSP really guards them and protects them with their life, and it makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to get to those other managers or decision makers. So how do you even do that? Like, how do you circumvent the MSP, have those important conversations without, first off, like, how do you actually do that? And then two, how do you do it without upsetting the MSP, making them feel like you're just trying to cut them out of the loop?
Yeah, very carefully, right? So what and I don't want to use the word, guys or ruse or anything like that, because that sounds not honest. But the way I try to lead in when I place the calls, because again, you're going to be leaving voice messages, you're going to be leaving emails, and that can be very easily forwarded to the MSP leadership. And then, as you know, then you have your hand slapped, and it's a whole different ball game. I try to lead in with things like direct hire, right? Realizing in most cases the MSP will not have direct hire. So I lead in with that. under the thought of the premise of talking about their direct hire permanent placement needs. And then when I meet with them, oh, by the way, let's talk about your contract needs. And that's where I typically get the information. So I lead in with direct hire. I also lead in with, excuse me, as you know, you've heard me talk about for statement of work, hey, we place a lot of contractors with XYZ skill set, via statement of work. I also lead in with candidate marketing. I'm a huge fan of candidate marketing because in all candor, it works. It starts conversations and it can generate job orders. So if I have a candidate head and shoulders above the rest, I know what they're hiring as I see what's out there on Indeed. I look at the job boards. I know what they're struggling with. So I get that candidate and I can often candidate market them in there. But those are some of the ways that I would lead in personally through the direct hire route, the SOW route, candidate marketing. At least that way it's not so blatant and flagrant, that I'm out there trying to sell contract staffing services when there's an MSP there. And to that point, Dan, none of those is foolproof. From time to time, you will get your hand slapped, and at that point, feigning the standpoint of, hey, sorry, didn't mean to, to do that. Really here to learn more about your program, because I believe that we can support you at XYZ. Right, because I see that you're challenged in hiring ABC type of skill set in this particular area or this particular industry. So that's usually my approach to it. Is yours different, or do you have something to add to that you do? Because I'd love to hear it. Because there's no silver bullet, right? There's no one way.
So I definitely always went in with the forgiveness versus permission.
Yes.
piece that and I don't know if that's militaristic based on my Army days, but I will say after hearing you present the SOW talk at the summit earlier this year, I realized that that's something that typically traditionally lives outside of an MSP. So I feel like that's a good entry point. And I've seen people do that. I've not been selling directly to clients since that period of time, so I don't have direct experience on that one.
Right. Usually with SOW, I'll say, hey, we perform statement of work project business, because oftentimes that project business doesn't fall underneath the MSP purview. So
Yeah.
that helps. Direct hire is usually my first go-to, because again, that typically isn't involved within the program. Another thing, Dan, I forgot to mention when we were speaking about the MSP a moment ago is, whether they let me into the program or not, it's just like what we would do with a prospect. I'm always trying to add value to them so I can become top of mind and ask them, hey, what do you need? What will provide value to you in your job in managing this client's hiring and contingent labor program? Is that market data? Is it salary data? Is it industry data? Is it information on regulation or legislation or compliance? Whatever that is, I always ask that MSP where they need help from a standpoint other than providing people. And they'll tell you, I've had some be very honest that they need a lot of salary information, or like, let's say it's a healthcare, they're managing a healthcare hospital system. Gosh, can you talk to me about what's the trend currently with travel RN case managers? How are they being found? How are they being paid? So I always ask that question, and typically at least it gives me an entry point instead of just being again, providing a body to them. Giving them something before they let me into the program, right? So I forgot to mention that earlier, and I think that's a very key and important point.
That makes sense.
But to kind of fast forward back to where we were, I love what you said, forgiveness versus permission. I've always gone that route too. You can always apologize your way right out of it. But one thing's for sure, if you don't reach out to the client leadership concurrent with the MSP, chances are pretty darn slim you're ever going to get in. You really have to get to that user buyer experiencing the pain, struggling and suffering under the MSP, not delivering to their recs quick enough. And then hopefully you can get in, get the sponsorship, fill a role through a PO, through a work order, fill a direct hire, and then start to get introductions and get then to evangelize you and be an advocate for you, to the MSP. And that's a great point. Like any client, we need to be building our coaches and advocates within the organization, right? Let's say you've done direct hire there before, you've made a placement in the past, and now they have a new MSP program in there. develop your coaches, develop your advocates, people that are going to support you, that want you to have success in the account, that are going to go and again evangelize you or promote you to that MSP. I think sometimes in staffing we do not a great job of developing coaches and advocates and getting those people that like our product to give us testimonials and walk us in, to
Yeah,
the MSP. Would you agree that we probably could be better at that?
we could be. We could be. That is one of those things that it's a huge opportunity that we miss. And it's just, and not even just on the client side, but the candidate side, but all over the board. Like we do a good job and we never ask people to talk about it, whether they want to advocate for more
Right.
business in their organization or more market share within the MSP or referrals. Like we don't do it. And I don't know if it's because this is like, we're just kind of selfless in this industry. You're kind of selfless, like kind of a thankless industry almost sometimes, but
Yeah.
we don't do the best job of like actually getting testimonials and creating advocates and people that champion us to grow. Some do, but I don't think it's the standard.
You're right, Dan. And honestly, guilty is charged. I think, and much to my fault, throughout my staffing career, sometimes you feel, a little awkward at asking that, or you're putting them out. And then what I had to force myself to do is, okay, hey, if I've delivered well for them, I shouldn't be afraid to ask, number one. Number two, make it easy for them. I've had some that I've asked for a testimonial and said, okay, if you don't have time to write a testimonial, let me take a crack at it, right? And give you a draft. And then you can take it and add to it or subtract or, put your own, your own personal, thoughts to it. And oftentimes that works. If you do some of the heavy lifting, at least give them an outline. But to that point, we do need to develop those coaches. Another piece too, Dan, as we know, out on LinkedIn, we have to post content, we have to connect to, and we have to engage with all of our prospects and all of our hiring managers. And again, provide that content to kind of draw them toward us, the push and pull of marketing. Same thing with the MSPs, right? Making sure that we're connected to them on LinkedIn, that we like their content, that we comment on it, and that we're also posting things that not only about the industry, staffing industry, but about the industry in particular that the MSP is supporting. Let's say it's healthcare, posts that will resonate with them about challenges in healthcare, or if they're managing financial services, post about that would be useful to them. So again, we know it's outbound in staffing, but if you can attract people to you through LinkedIn, just like we do our hiring managers and line level managers and VPs, do the same thing with the MSP. Draw them to you. It's free and it doesn't take that long to do. So capitalize on it.
Love it.
Right.
Love it.
So what do you do, Dan, when the MSP resists your advances? Which happens.
I go in the corner and I cry, Kim.
Yeah.
Isn't that what we're supposed to do?
Yeah,
No.
that's what we're supposed to do in staffing, right?
So it's definitely a question that I wanted to pick your brain on because like they're just like a client. Sometimes they behave just like a client and they don't always, engage. But I guess for me, like if they resist my advances, I don't give up because like
Right.
my job is as a sales rep is to grow business. And if they are a target that I want to explore and I've not kind of disqualified them yet, then I have to keep going. And I would say I would kind of, depending on where I'm getting the resistance from, if I need to go higher up into the MSP organization, I will.
Right.
If I need to go find a different entry point, meaning a different client program that they manage and try in a different area, I will do that. But I will basically keep scouring that organization, or kind of to your point earlier, if I need to go circumvent them and befriend one of their organizations and get an endorsement from the client, like I will do that. But I'm relentless. I will basically work the account until I disqualify them, or maybe they throw out a restraining order. I don't know.
Yeah,
What do you
you're
do?
right.
You're the assassin here. What do you
Yeah.
do?
So you have to do all of them, to your point, right? You have to, don't just stay stuck at that, relationship supplier, VP VP of the program level. We've got to get to the corporate level and start speaking to those folks like we mentioned earlier. We've got to not only meet with the line managers on the client side, we've got to get up to the director, VP, C level, chief technology officer level, at the, on the client side. We have to continually candidate market. Again, I mentioned I'm a big advocate of that. If I can show them somebody that they need, it's going to make not only the MSP, but again, that line leader, that client line leader, much more open to working with me. Direct hire, great excuse. Breaking permanent placements are a great excuse to be on site, great excuse to get information, great excuse to work a contract job order because you've already shown that you can deliver. I really leverage that direct hire perm placement piece, right? Asking the MSP for difficult job orders, not only in this program, but to your point, Dan, if that corporate MSP level, what are some of your jobs that are going unfilled in various geographies or various skill sets? I want those jobs. But then if you're going to accept them, as you and I both know, be darn sure that you can fill them, right? Don't go and accept something and then fall down all over yourself because it's certainly not going to state your case. Ask for the difficult roles. If you can fill them, take them in, and that's going to be a great entry point that's in there. Sometimes if it makes financial and good business sense, and I highlight that, financial and good business sense, can you maybe sub, through a supplier, right? What does that look like? Usually it doesn't work, but I will say, in the environment that I came from, we started as a sub for PwC, and then ultimately performed so well that we became a tier 1 supplier. So sometimes that can be an inroad, usually not, right? And then oftentimes too, I hate to say this, but at the end of the day, like you said, we want to make the decision whether we work with them or not. And if it's never going to work out, and we've tried and we beat our head through the wall, we've been at it now for a couple of years, can you make them a source, right? Is this someone, are they better as a source or better as a client? And, we've made that call as well. Kind of goes back to knowing, when to cut your losses and what makes sense there. So those are just, again, some additional ways. And of course, always, as I say, trying to do the statement of work pieces in and around the MSP if we're trying to navigate around. So to your point, I try so many different angles and so many different people all concurrent at the same time to see which one's going to stick. Is it SOW? Is it direct hire? Is it candidate marketing? Is it getting entry to a different program? Is it going to line managers? Is it going to MSP executive leadership? I try it all, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You need to.
Because there is no one size fits all solution to it. And that's what I'd say to anyone on this call. Try every bit of it because you don't know what's going to work in that particular situation. Try all these tactics.
Yeah. And I think it comes back to that point that you nailed home earlier, is that you have to treat them like they're a client. You got to approach it that way, and you got to deploy all. You would do those same tactics with a traditional client, yet for some reason we don't think about that when approaching MSPs.
Yeah, exactly. It's no different. You're going into different departments, different people, you're profiling the account, asking the questions, learning who has the pain, who has the challenges and the issues, because that most likely will be your entry point. Another area, Dan, one thing I neglected to mention, and I don't want to let this slip by us, is we always talk about when we have our client base, and I'm sure you do this with your teams, you always want to collect case studies and collect client success stories so you can go and use them, right, for other prospects. Same thing from the MSP. The MSP is going to ask us a bunch of questions that we better be prepared to answer. Number one, what percentage of your revenue currently comes from an MSP? What other MSPs have you successfully supported? Do you have any other MSP scorecards, and can I see them, right? What are your top 5, MSP programs that you've had gained entry into? What are the top skill sets, top job title descriptions or skill sets that you place? What are your specialty areas? Tell me a time when you worked with an MSP and you did something innovative, related to technology. Or tell me how you go about, the back office in terms of onboarding people, and what's your consultant care program to keep them on assignment once they're here. So every MSP, that while I'm asking those questions about their challenges, their skill sets, all this stuff, the geography, they're asking me concurrently all these questions. So they want to know that I'm able to operate in their environment, that I'm used to working in the MSP model. So I'd say is if you have success stories in one MSP, capitalize on that, have your data down, have your stats down, and be able to go and explain that to them and tout that to them, because it shows you understand how to navigate, through a program that's similar to theirs. I didn't want to lose sight of that. Pretty important.
And that's smart. I think that, if you are going to target selling to MSPs, which is a great way to go, especially in today's day and age, because they need partners. That's someone that absolutely has a need for what we offer. Creating that capability statement that's data backed. This is, hey, I'm because you're speaking their language at that point. You're saying, hey, we've done this. And if you haven't done it, if like this is your first time on the dance floor, it's okay to say it, but create that capability statement template and show data from how you currently service your other clients. Like, what is your time to fill? If they see that you understand data and metrics and that you do service traditional clients, like they know that they might be the first MSP program that you're being invited to, but if they understand that you track those things and it's important to you and compliance and all that stuff is important, you're speaking their language. And if you can present it in a nice kind of marketing polished capability statement, I think that's a huge asset when you're approaching these programs.
Yeah, and Dan, think about it. Every time you or I approach a prospect, forget the MSP side, pretend there's not even an MSP there. Every time we approach a prospect, we always customize the call, right? To skill set or to industry or just something that we know that they're going to be challenged with. Well, before we even place the call, we prepare that. Same thing with an MSP. Let's say I've never, to your point, worked in an MSP model before, and this is my first dance, as you said. Customize it to industry. Set yourself up as, let's say it's an MSP that they have big hospital systems underneath them. Set yourself up as an expert, a subject matter expert, right? And a trusted advisor in the industry of healthcare. And then be able to go and show your testimonials, your case studies, your success stories, the results and impact that you deliver for other hospital systems, right? That may not have been in an MSP, but it's showing that you've got the capability to understand an industry's problems and move past that and give them what they need in terms of staff, right?
Yeah,
That's just how I like to view it.
spot on.
Industry is strong. Industry is a very strong entry point.
Yeah.
Because I think every industry has subtle nuances and challenges, and they all think that they're very, very special, and they've all got their own regulation issues and problems. And if we can go and show that we, have delivered for other similar clients in that realm, it's strong.
Love it.
Okay, great. Dan, what are your thoughts? Any other closing? That I think about kind of wraps up my, thoughts in terms of selling to MSPs. I think the key takeaways are, in my mind, it's a multi-pronged approach. You're going to want to go hit the MSP, the local MSP people. You're going to want to move up that chain. If you can't get them on the phone, they won't take your meeting. You're going to want to meet at the corporate level. You're also going to want to meet the client leadership, the users, and really kind of determine where the pain points are for all of them and see if that's an entry point, right? And again, consider things like skills, geography, onboarding, retention as areas that could be pain points. Make sure your candidate marketing, make sure you're leveraging firm placement direct hire, make sure you're leveraging trying to use statement of work or a one-off purchase order or work order to get in there. So multiple different avenues. And I think the key takeaway is you have to try all of them concurrent at the same time.
Yeah.
And then finally, evaluate the MSP honestly. Be honest with yourself. You know your company's capabilities. If you can't meet the requirements that they have, either contractually or from a rules of engagement or from a process and rate standpoint, it's better to pass than get a black eye and not perform.
Yeah. Yeah. And a couple others to add as well, kind of on that one, assessing your own capabilities, like document your capability statement, use that as part of your prospecting outreach. When you're reaching out to them, prospect them and treat them just like you would a traditional client, and think about it in that way. Don't think that you're just requesting an interview to be interviewed and be evaluated. Like actually show up. It's a two-way interview. You're doing discovery on them to see if they've got pain points that you can solve for, and then really as Kim mentioned, as you mentioned, Kim, just, it's okay to be self-aware and say, what, this isn't a good fit for me. I can't deliver for you, and walk away. Like they'll respect that. And it gives you credibility, and who knows, maybe another client that's in their program that you're a better fit for is an open door later, And with that note, I think a piece that we didn't really drive into, but in the I guess the holistic conversation points to this. This is the long game. It's a multi-pronged approach to break into it, but if you keep the end in mind, if you find favor with an MSP, they don't just serve one client. Like they are a managed service provider. They have hundreds, if not thousands of clients across the country that they work with. Like you can actually get in there and if you perform well with one, they will introduce you to others. And once you're in, you can ask for those referrals. You can say, hey, do you have any other, employer companies that you work with that maybe the program's not going the way that you had hoped that you would, introduce me to and let me join that program. And it's a great way to kind of network within there. And what's really nice about that is it's less competitive there because you've already broken down the barrier. You've already got onto the program. You've already performed at a higher level and you've been in kind of the top maybe 20 or 30% of vendors they have with a client. That's going to be a much narrower field to compete with. And they will gladly refer their top performers to their other clients because you're their deliverable and they will gladly put you there. So I think you have to keep the end in mind when you're thinking about selling and growing MSP relationships.
Yeah, to Dan's point, that's it's the carrot, right? Not only is it gaining entry into that program, but each subsequent program that they have, the door opens so much more quickly and easily. So I think, if you're sitting back and and you're listening to this, you're going, gosh, why do you even want to approach all of this, right? Why do you even want to go down this pathway? And I think that the reasons are, number one, it's not going away. It's really just going to continue to proliferate every industry and every size account that has sizable staffing spend. So we can't put our head in the sand on it. We have to adapt and accept the MSPs, but there is a way to go and partner with them. And if you are successful at becoming that advisor, that trusted resource for them and performing well in a program, it just gets easier and easier and easier because the doors keep opening. And Dan, we talked about the scorecard. It ties into this as well a moment ago. The scorecard, oftentimes we look at that as a negative. Oh gosh, the scorecard. I can't tell you how much positive a scorecard can be. It can give you great view into your own processes and into your own weaknesses as a company to kind of objectively look at yourself and go, wow, we're really struggling here. Well, we're doing great here. Wow, this is something we need to look at. We've got a problem here and it's becoming a pattern even with our other clients. So I started to embrace that scorecard because in a way, instead of us having to go out and survey our clients and which we do, and we talk, to them, hey, how are we doing? We got a quarterly report card in a way that showed us, where we needed to work on things and where we were doing well. And also, too, sometimes the scorecards could maybe be a little incorrect. It gave us the opportunity to push back or just have solid conversations with our MSP where if they're saying, hey, your candidates aren't getting interviewed, we can have a two-way street to kind of explain, hey, they're not getting interviewed due to some issues with the process, right? So it created a partnership and a two-way street, like a dialogue of, we may be missing this metric, but here's what you can do on the process side to help us hit that metric, right? And I found it generated better conversations versus clients where you have no scorecard and you're there trying to pull the information out of them after the fact. So I thought that was a very, very positive. And then again, to kind of put the wrapper on it, think about, again, like a regular client or a regular prospect. What can you do that's going to provide value to them, right? While you're attempting to get in there. What type of data can you provide them? Can you candidate market? I think that provides tremendous value versus calling them up all the time going, hey, admit me to the program. So yeah, be resourceful and think about it and realize that the real prize is multiple programs. And once you're in, your prospecting, as we talked about earlier, becomes easy, Dan. You've got names on requisitions. You start to see volume projects. You start to see business units and divisions that you didn't know about before, right? So it takes your prospecting time and usually cuts that at least by a third. So
Yeah.
it's worth it.
No, I agree. And not only is it worth it, it's the way for the next. If you don't have selling to MSPs, if you service middle market and up, like if you only service kind of small businesses and whatnot, you might not have to worry about this. But if you want to get into larger employers, kind of middle market and up, if you're not making MSP part of your prospecting and business client, acquisition strategy, you're going to miss a huge market segment. And honestly, if you're not doing it in the middle market, you're going to lose first mover advantage because like that is going to be where the most activity happens with MSP and VMS plays over the next, really 1 to 5 years. So Kim Henderson, Wealth of Knowledge. I am grateful for, you coming back and sharing that wisdom with our group here. If anyone wants to follow up with you and learn more about how to sell into MSPs or how to grow those relationships, or even, pick your brain on the SOW stuff that you shared at the summit, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is a great way. You can find me on LinkedIn and just shoot me a direct message. Or my email address is kh@cobaltcompasssolutions.com. I assure you, email hits me pretty quick, and I definitely look at my direct messages all throughout the day. So we'd love to talk to anybody that maybe just needs an extra boost or wants to troubleshoot an MSP that they're trying to get into, or troubleshoot perhaps an SOW type situation. So.
Absolutely. And I highly recommend Kim. She is not your typical consultant. She is a game plan. So if you're a leader that, is serious about growth and you feel like the one thing that's standing between you and growing and succeeding is a clear path with a checklist with actual tactics that work, Kim's your person. Reach out to her, become friends with her. She's a great advisor to the industry and she's doing some pretty special things. So Kim, thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you at the summit here in just a few short months.
You got it, Dan. I'm excited. Thanks for having me in. I appreciate it. Talk soon.
All right, quick snippet here. Hey, Kim, I'm really excited about our upcoming interview in Staffing Monthly that talks about how to sell into MSP. And the reason I'm getting excited about this is because there's still a lot of confusion and talk about whether we're headed into a recession or not. I see Bank of America said we're not. Jamie Dimon says we are. I don't think anyone really knows. It kind of feels like we are. According to clients, it seems like we are, but yet there's still job growth. Like, I don't know what's going on. What is one strategy as it relates to MSP, or why are you so bullish on MSP in times of uncertainty?
So that's a great question, Dan. In terms of MSPs, they typically are in place for, again, your larger enterprise accounts, right? And what I've experienced during recessionary times, right? Like if we're 2001, 2009, is while your smaller, segment two, mid-market type customers aren't hiring and tend to put the brakes on, your larger enterprise customers that are managed by MSPs still are typically hiring. They may not be hiring to the degree that they were, but they still have to keep the lights on. They have to keep network and infrastructure up, database administration. They still have to keep, AP, AR, HR, legal functions up. All that requires hiring and requires resources. So what I'd say is, while we're in a tepid hiring environment right now, if we do head into a recessionary environment in the near term, MSP type accounts are going to be the ones that still hire. So it's going to help you diversify your income stream, your revenue stream for your staffing company, and help you weather a recessionary storm better, because they still are going to need resources.
I love that, folks. And if you are looking for kind of near recession proof business, or you're looking for some stability during these kind of volatile times, you should seriously consider adding MSP business to your prospecting plan. And if you want to know all of Kim's strategies and tactics to really target this industry and acquire MSP clients and grow, definitely check out her interview in the upcoming issue of Staffing Monthly.